Beside you. Yeah. I had to work yesterday, so I called. So I called Donna. I said, "You watching the game?" She said, "Nope, I just can't take it." Yeah. Yeah. All right. Good morning, everyone. It's time to get underway. I like your hair. Yeah, it's cool. Kind of sounds like a Wednesday evening in a teen class. Lots of energy. That's it. That is it. So what happens if you can't get people's attention? You just come out and join them. How you doing, Frida? Just have free to stand up. So it is time to begin. Josh, see that big smile on his face? Grandpa? What are we going to call him? Papa Josh or Papa Josh, or just call him Pa? It's neat. All right, so thanks for coming this morning, and I think the Carters are correct, and we have so much energy. We got more sleep last night, and it was lighter earlier this morning. It's like we're enjoying the daylight, more of the daylight, although we'll give it up tonight. So. Oh, true, that as well. Friday night was an exciting time. All right, let's go to God in prayer. Holy Father, we thank you so much for the opportunity to gather this morning, and even excited about the energy and the group, and God, just the opportunity to come together and commonness, because we are in your family, and help us to reflect on that as we think about our own physical families, and use you as our guiding principle. We ask you guide us our thoughts this morning as we go through this class. It's in your Son's name we pray. Amen. All right, so last week we started building on the aspect, let me turn this thing on, growth and development of our children, and so we did a little bit of time review of the different generations, kind of what they're known for, some of the things that which they have experienced, which impacts their view on life, how they react to life, and many different facets. And some of it was directly in that they experienced it. Some of it was they indirectly experienced it through their parents or grandparents, and that affects how they view the world and so forth. And we touched on some of the major things that had taken place as far as disease-wise, and Daniel had brought up the point that he felt a lot as he works with young people in school, is 9/11 had considerable impact in relative to fear and things not really under my control, and so therefore anxiety is because I can't control it. And fear is very paralyzing, and that certainly was an event in the history of the U.S. that has impacted, I think, the way that we think about things as adults, much less that generation that was born in 95 to 2009, and when you get to Generation Alpha, they've heard about it, but it didn't maybe impact them quite the same. And so we started out then at the end of class at this point. And that is, so often, most all of us, when we decided, and maybe for some of us, we didn't actually overtly decide we're going to have children, but we had children. But when we were doing planning and saying, it's time now, we had children, and Donna and I case, we waited a while, and we were thinking about, well, maybe we wait till I had finished college, and then we decided we're going to be too old. And so we decided to get started finally, and then having kids while you're in college. I wouldn't recommend it. You just got to be ready for some of the financial challenges and other things like that. I remember how close we were counting the bank account many times while in college. And so anyway, when we go about the process of deciding to have a family, so often we don't think about parenting. What does it mean to parent other than getting them, at least out of diapers? I mean, we kind of get prepared for that with the showers and all the things about that. And then maybe we have a child who is having difficulty with nursing or then certain formula. And then it's like, wow, I didn't plan for this. And so you begin to counter some of those things, and then sometimes they mount to bigger things later on. And then you see that in parents where they react to like, wow, I'm not getting, well, first of all, they're sleep deprived, and then they're dealing with these other challenges, and finally they get through that phase, and then it's a new phase and something else. And so what I guess I'm trying to really say is we don't really start out parenting, realize what we are to be doing in guiding the children to when they leave home. We're dealing with the here and the now, and so it's quite different, though, if we start out with parenting and saying, this is who we want them to become. Because then that changes our whole mindset. Okay, we're having difficulties with at this point in time, but we'll get through this because we know who we believe in, and that even amidst these struggles, the most important thing is my faith to God, my relationship with my spouse, and my church family. And so you don't remove yourself from that framework just because you're struggling maybe with parenting. And so you have to start out and as much as continue to remind ourselves with the end in mind. What do I hope for this child or the next one to be when they fly out of the nest? Or maybe they fall out, Maybe they don't fly. Not all birds successfully fly out of the nest. Some of them plump to the ground, and right, you see them in your yard, right, Daniel? I'm sure when you're cleaning your yard. Yeah. It's beautiful, yeah. I didn't get that done yesterday, so I'm feeling ill prepared with my yard at the moment. So then we went on to focus on what is the question, and the question is not what do we want them to become. Do we want them to become the same occupation that we have? Do we want them to be completely financially responsible by time X or Y? The more important question is, who do we want them to become? And so in answering that question, we have to imagine who they're going to be. Even if they're a month old, 10 years old, or the same principles in terms of our guiding if we're still dealing with someone just trying to get their license. Because there's challenges at each one of those stages of development, and when we lose our sight of the goal, we become infatuated with the crisis. Rather than pulling from the strength that's everywhere else, and it's kind of like when we're dealing with something and we're just so focused we can't see what's happening here or out there in terms of the child. And so how we react to the now will be in a better context if we see where we're trying to get them to. You know, maybe it's a teen and you're telling them no, they can't do something. But the no, they can't do it is because you're thinking out here and they're wanting a yes right now. And you don't want to deal with the consequences when you tell them no. So you're going to give in to the consequences or to say yes when the better answer is no, because when you look out here, the answer should be no now. And that's the tough part, even for us, because it may be hitting us when we're stressed about something else. Could be health, could be job, whatever it is, and we just don't want to deal with it. So we're going to say yes now when we know, based on even what we be prepared for, the probability of the future, the answer should be no. So then you do that, and then the next time, the answer should be no, but you've already said once yes. So then you're going to have to deal with them. But you told me yes last time. Why are you telling me no now? So it kind of mounts on each other. And so consistency is important. But in answering that, who do you want them to become? I mean, here's some aspects that certainly come into mind. Faith. We want them to develop a faith in God. And the key, I think, in them flying out of the nest is, has their faith become their own? Or is it still just parental faith? They come to church because mom and dad told me so. Or have they developed their own faith to where they want to be here? And so if they want to be here, when they fly out of the nest, they're going to want to be in the presence of God. They're going to want to be in the presence of God's family. Otherwise, mom and dad's not making me now. I get to make my own choices. Joe. Yes.
That faith is so grateful because they don't have science, they don't have truth, they just have hope and these ideas that we give them, and it's quite sad. I don't know the statistics offhand, but I know it's quite remarkable that kids who go off to college, their faith is absolutely shattered, and I don't think that's relegated only to secular colleges. I think that a lot of kids go to Christian colleges and maybe don't have their faith rocked, but certainly they come back with a different view of our Christian faith that I've seen anecdotal examples of over and over that it's really quite scary. But in any event, we try to be very intentional with giving them not just faith, but the science and the fact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think they need to have the knowledge behind for the foundation of that faith rather than just belief that the whole essence of the credibility of the Bible and creation, and they're going. Yeah, it happens before college. It's all in their development. I mean, you know, yes, school is one source, but their phones, TV. I mean, it's everywhere. Now, the transition from being at home versus at college is they are exposed to a lot in college that they have to decide themselves because mom and dad is not saying yes and no. And then when in some of the science classes they take, you know, unless they have that foundation, then they're not going to challenge the thoughts in class. You know, and I took a world religions class as a college student, and the professor and I did not agree. But fortunately, I was able to survive in the class, and we ended the class not agreeing. Now, not every professor may be that way, and you have to be a little cautious to get what you say, and even as you put it on the exams because of where they take off credit. But so you're going to run into that. But you need to be fine with that, and maybe, you know, maybe a B or C is fine in that class, or you know, that's run into sometimes with the religious courses. Also, it's at times with the science courses, chemistry, biology, when they get into the essence of where things originated from. Ryan. Mm-hmm.
But my science class tells me that there's dinosaurs. They're 5 million years old. And so he'll be like, how are those two things possible? And then, like, we were trick-or-treating, and Liam was a dinosaur for Halloween.
Yep.
And he was literally like...
Cute one, too.
He was like, what was that?
See, it was a cute one, too.
Oh, yeah. But he was literally like telling Liam, like, Liam, dinosaurs can't be real. Like, he was arguing with him about, like, you know, stuff. So maybe you guys could tell me, like, my oldest son, who's, like, super smart, like 90% percentile for just being smart in school. And so how would you, he's the one that I worry about having a hard time, like, big time. Because he questions everything.
Well, and I think it's a great point that you bring up. We need to allow them to ask those questions at home and have the conversation. And when we struggle with finding the answers, then to lean upon others. Like, we can't deny the existence of dinosaurs when you look at the bones have been found and so forth. But then you go back and put it into the context of history. There are some explanations there, and there's been some really well-known people that even within our brotherhood that have regularly provided that evidence. And so we can get that for families, and so you can have that conversation at home, or we can have the conversation with them. Rather than, I think the greatest risk is trying to cover up and say, well, I don't know, you bring up a great point there, and yeah, I don't know. So that leaves them doubting is that God really is a creator, and that there's a missing link there that then gives them further doubt that they will use and build on doubt of other things. So we have to give them the freedom of the conversation. And I know as parents, sometimes we're not comfortable with those conversations. But we have to provide the forum to have them and then come back with answers later. Because you may have to start the conversation back up next time because they've gone on to something else. But it doesn't mean right there in a little spot that they are keeping that and they'll use it later.
In schools and stuff, but my parents were really good about finding the Christian, like, found all these books because I still love dinosaurs and fascinated by dinosaurs, and they would find books that explain from the Christian viewpoint as we knew it at that time how this could happen. And there are ways you can find and teach. While they're doing the opposing view heavily, you can also teach. You also got to teach them kind of not to be a jerk about going, well, that's wrong with your teacher because that.
Yeah, context is important. Yeah. Yeah. But on the flip side of that, in terms of a founding principle of doing something right, you want them to have that demeanor at the same time, learning that discretion of when it's best used. And you know, as adults, we have to be careful too. Sometimes when we're approached, especially by someone younger with that, is we want to get defensive. Why be defensive? Hear them out. Yeah. But so when you know I'm approached in that kind of mindset by a college student or someone younger, it's like, okay, let's hear them out. You know, see what they got to say. Yeah.
That's always been my question. Okay, yes, okay, so if God created the heavens and the earth, everything in 7 days. So they did it 800 million years ago. It's like they try to put it in a concept like this just happened like 5,000 years ago.
Yeah.
And I don't know that it's ever said, actually, ever say how old God is. So
Yeah, I think just in and all that we don't all fully understand, and we want to put context into 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year that we live within today, relative to even think Methuselah could be how old? Wow, I bet he had a few wrinkles. You know, in that kind of mindset about the creation, and so, which is kind of another conversation of its own, but we do struggle with that. And so if we, even as adults, struggle with that, why shouldn't our kids want to ask them questions? So we just need to be ready to answer them, and maybe that's a conversation we should have later in terms of how do we answer those kinds of questions. And if you want to come up with a list of, here are some questions I'd like to know how to answer, give those to me, and we can go from there. You had a comment, Mary Ellen.
Two sources. I grew up with in the church in the 80s and the 70s. In the 80s was John Clayton.
Yep. I still have a lot of those books, Does God Exist?
Right. It's still out there on the web.
Yep, they are.
And answersingenesis.org is out on the web. You may not agree with everything they say,
Sure.
per se, but it is sources to find out stuff.
You know, in terms of my own thinking, of course, I'll get to you just in a second, Joe, is I always kind of come back, because, you know, about, 10 years or more ago, there was a lot of conversation around ID, intelligent design. You know, they wouldn't necessarily say God, but they would say that, okay, I believe that there's intelligent design. Well, why don't you just call it God and let's move on? But they wouldn't necessarily do that. But I always, in my own self, when those kind of things come up, and, you know, I go back to, in terms of thinking about life, and that, I mean, yes, we have this and we go to it, but just the essence of how could the details of this life, and as a scientist too, why not spend so much trying to figure out how intricately God created the human body or functioning in nature? How many billions and billions of dollars in time to just try to figure out how the nature of God's ability to create material. It's amazing. I always have to, if you ever, I think that's something to encourage young people to think about. I think you have a better answer, I want to hear your answer. And then they go for a pause because they don't have a better answer. And then, so what's the problem with believing that God did it? Joe.
this deal, I remember teaching Sean on the way, and he will go and he will not depart from it.
Yep.
I think we beat ourselves.
Proverbs 22:6.
It doesn't say that he won't make mistakes.
Yep.
What I take out of that scripture is that he cannot separate himself from that which he is wrong.
Yep.
Not that he won't go wrong. So just do the best you can. And a comment she made about John Beck, who used to go to church with him. In fact, Sue taught his children how to play the piano.
Oh, cool. Very cool. Because he lived northeast Indiana. John lived in Indiana. What was the city? What city were you living in at that time? Yeah, I know, but what city was it? South Bend, yeah. I knew. You guys lived up in that area too. So, yeah, I think that's so important. And you think about Proverbs 22:6, train up a child, and then when he is older, he will not depart from it. One of the whole fundamental aspects of the value of that is training to solve problems and to deal with life, which is one of the major challenges our young people face today. They don't know how to solve problems. They either it's been fixed by parents, or they avoid it by ignoring its presence. And it's just, they continue to act in a way that the inevitable is not going to happen until the inevitable happens. And then they can't understand why. Because they... Yeah, consistency is important, and part of the first step of that is listening, because oftentimes we're not even hearing what they're saying, we're just pushing them away because we're not listening, we're focusing on our own thing. But consistency is important, Daniel. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 They want to know answers that are founded on something that they can put some, I would say, faith in. And at the same time, they don't want us to appear that we know it all, and because we know it, they should embrace it. We need to give them the room to think through what we have to share, and then embrace it on their own understanding, rather than just because it's been told. Because that's how their faith is going to grow to become their own, when they embrace it as their own, not just that Mom and Dad said. Sure. Right.
but it's just different. So like, his cousins don't go to church, and he goes, why don't they go to church? And he's asking him the bigger questions of like, why wouldn't they believe in this? And it's, you know, taking that approach of not like just putting them down and making them enemies, but giving
Yep.
them a structure like what's the church, and learning that that is dangerous for what and they're gonna maybe do things that will work for them too. And so just kind of explaining when we see a behavior that maybe not a family is going with in our whole structure. I think it's been a really good one. It seems a little open-ended too, because I don't always have the answer. It gives you some time to prepare.
True, true. Yeah, I mean, that's an excellent point. And when we think about child development, and the development of the brain occurs at different stages, and then the hormonal influence of different stages, all of that's coming into play. And at the same time, we need to recognize that and to guide that rather than to always battle it and kind of play into that. And that's why it is important to protect them from certain things at certain ages because of the brain development. And they shouldn't have to deal with certain things at a certain age. And unfortunately, the vulnerability of that exposure is greater today than it's ever been because of media and so forth. Joe, you had another comment?
We had a little phrase in your first statement about know-it-all. No, sometimes we make mistakes. We ought to tell our children, I made a mistake, and I'm sorry about that. I was wrong.
Yep. Yeah, that's pretty valuable. It's tough to do, but I think we need to be willing to do that. And I remember some of those times when we told our kids certain things and it was the wrong decision. We had to face up to that. It didn't diminish their belief in what we were trying to do. I think it just reveals the fallacy that sometimes we as parents, we're human. But it's a hurdle to overcome, especially if you're dealing with, you know, if you're young kids and they just, it's over and they're gone on. But if you're dealing with a teenager and it was something that really you were battling over and you realize you've made the incorrect decision, you're always afraid then their view of you is going to diminish. It really doesn't. But it's embracing that and accepting that because even though we know we're not perfect and we have all the answers, we want it to appear that way in front of our kids. Lori? True. You have to guide them. Yep. Yeah, he wanted to find it, so he dug further. If somebody doesn't study and dig further, they just accept it and don't try to continue to learn, then that's where the blockade occurs. And even for our own selves today, being open and evaluating, and can we really come up with an answer that is here? So if we can't find it in the Bible, where did I get that conclusion? Did I listen to somebody else and that was their answer, so therefore they're the one that I'm basing my view on rather than the Bible? So why is it that I believe certain things? And if we can't go back here, and then that's the way of parenting. I think the parenting style I used was just based on my parents? No, but there were some of them. Doesn't mean it was necessarily right. Some of them certainly was. Josh?
There's a lot of questions that come to the Bible and later, like Deuteronomy 29:29, it says,
Yep. And it takes a long time for us to accept that, and it goes back to the point Daniel was making last week. A lot of it's maturity, to where we realize as we go through this life, we don't have answers to everything, and that every question about God, we can't really answer because He's God. And yes, we pray to Him and expect prayers to be answered. And do miracles occur from our prayers to Him? Well, of course they do, or why do we continue to pray? But how? How did God decide to work in to answering our prayers? We don't know at times. We just have to wait. Then we look back. It's a backward reflection. That's how God answered my prayer. Why He wanted me to go through this, rather than knowing it up front. And that's kind of the way it is, and is even our human aspects. We can't have all the answers, so after we've experienced some things, and then we look back, then we can guide our young people. But it doesn't mean they're ready to accept it, because that's not what they want at the moment. And so it's the looking back, and it's that tough decision, even though we know how it's going to turn out. So kind of like Lori was saying, we know how it's probably going to turn out, and we want to protect them. We want to provide some freedom here that they make the right decision without stepping in. Sometimes we just need to step in and protect them because that's necessary. There are other times we need to let them fail so they can work through the failure. But it's hard sometimes to decide, and it depends on the issue, how minor it is and so forth. Joe?
You can have two children. You treat them the same. One goes off.
Yeah, and so genetics is very powerful in that, but it's also just, I mean, there's no two people just exactly alike. And you see that in families. Look through every one of your families and how different your children are, even in twins' case. I know, and so it's genetics along with, you get a little bit of age spread and birth order, then it's experiences in combination with genetics, and also changing parents as they mature and handling things differently. Why is it always the youngest in the family is treated differently than the oldest in the family? Because the parents have changed. So you have all of that coming into that mix. Faith. What do we want them to be as their character? And how do we help shape that? Their behavior, how to handle situations, how to respond in disappointment, how to respond with anger. If they always see anger as an outburst in the family, how are they going to respond to a disappointment with anger in a boisterous way? But also handling anger by excluding yourself and not talking it out is not necessarily good in every situation either. So both extremes can be problematic. The attitude, we see conversation around always of attitude negatively about something, and then you hear your children talking to other children. Wow, they said they were expressing an attitude. I'm not sure I'm very, concerned about their attitude on that. They may have picked it up at home. Did you look in the mirror while you were saying it? Watch your lips move? Maybe that's where they picked up on the attitude. They learned it from home. Now, not always. They may have picked up on their friends, and then you get concerned, oh my, how do we combat this? It's something that you have to have that conversation with them at home. What are their values? What are they going to value when 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now? And even if you have grown children, you still think about these things. Where is it they are in their faith today? Are they growing in faith? Am I growing in my faith? Then can I help them grow in their faith? What are they putting their values on? Are they putting all their energy on buying that first house? What are they sacrificing? All those kinds of questions that we ask throughout from very little, to if we and to older, that what's the end point out here. Any other comments on that? So let's look to 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 4 through 8. It says, love is patient, love is kind, and is not jealous. Love does not brag, and is not arrogant, does not act unbecomingly, it does not seek its own, is not provoked, does not take into account a wrong suffered, does not rejoice in unrighteousness, but rejoices in the truth, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails. But if there are gifts of prophecy, they shall be done away. There are tongues, they shall cease. And if there's knowledge, it will be done away. This is the foundation of love and why love is so important in the home as the foundation. And what is the source of that is God. We learn how to love from God. And then verses 11 through 13. This is Paul speaking, is that when I was a child, I used to speak as a child, think as a child, reason as a child. When I became a man, I did away with childish things, something we all have to think about at times. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face, now I know in part, but then I shall know fully, just as I also have been fully known. Now abide faith, hope, love. These three are the greatest of these is love. So that faith, that hope, and that love need to be a foundation in the family, because that's the springboard for so many other things that we're going to need that foundation in teaching our children and keeping us grounded as well. So when we think about the raising of kids, I think we have to go back and just think about this foundation. So if you just flip back to Luke, and I know this is really fundamental, but if we don't keep God as the foundation, then we're using other standards to develop that foundation. So in Luke 6:46, it's a very common text, and we're already over, so let me just kind of touch on this point so you can be thinking about this. And so Jesus here, a lot of red letters here, so Jesus is teaching in parables, and he says, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not what I say? That is one of the most fundamental things in raising children, is living a life like your words reflect. You gotta do what you say, because if you don't, they sniff you out so quickly. You tell me to do this, but you're not doing it. And that's what Jesus is really saying here about your spiritual life. Just don't call me Lord and then go do whatever you want to do. Live as I am your Lord. And then he tells the story. Everyone who comes to me and hears my words and acts on them, I will show you whom he is like. He's like a man building a house who dug deep and laid a foundation upon the rock, and when a flood arose and the torrent burst against that house and could not shake it because it had been well built. But the one who has heard and has not acted accordingly is like a man who built a house upon the ground without any foundation, and the torrent burst against it, and immediately it collapsed, and the rain that the house was built and the ruin of the house was great. So the context of this really applies to parenting. If we're going to, we should be using God as our foundation and modeling our life after that. And when we say something to our kids, then that should be through the filters of what is it that I am as a child of God. And so often I go back to what we started class at. We don't think what it's going to take to build this family. God. And, it's going to take time together. It's going to take working through issues together, because the storms are going to come. They're inevitable. You know, it's not like deciding are you going to live in Montana to escape hurricanes, not live in Oklahoma to escape tornadoes. Life, it's going to happen. And so it's how we survive through that as a family, as a husband and wife, as parents and children, is going to be based on that foundation. And that's so fundamental of what Jesus is saying here is to our life. If you're going to call me Lord, live as I am the Lord in your life. We'll pick up there next week. Good discussion. Thanks for your comments.